with the hedging. Joining me right now is NBC's Ken Delaney, and of course, U.S. Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee. The Washington Post, Karin Demirjian, and Jonathan Swan of Axios. I want to go to the congressman right now, and we have a commander-in-chief, and that is part of the role of this president, who does not acknowledge we were attacked. I've never heard of a country that's been attacked where the commander-in-chief says, maybe. I mean, what kind of an answer is that? You're supposed to have a guy like Churchill that says, damn it, we're going to stop this. A little fire, maybe. And you have no fire from this guy, except what's he hiding? That's all we ask. What's he hiding?
And look, it's a huge problem. I mean, when we think about the response to the Russians, and the response is really important, and quite frankly, President Obama, though he had some measures to retaliate, they did not make an impression on Vladimir Putin. When there's ambiguity on the part of the United States president about whether it even happened, the Russians are lapping that up, and so one of the things that needs to happen, and of course, the president is alone in his assessment. And by the way, he's not wrong. It's hard to attribute cyber attacks. It's not easy, but we do it, and we do it well, and there's no question about this. So one of the things that needs to happen is that he, as the president of the United States and commander-in-chief, needs to join the effort of countering what the Russians did. If he doesn't do that, it's happening again.
Karin, this is not an opinion question. Do you like lower taxes, higher taxes? Do you want a little more socialism, a little less socialism? And those are opinions. They're all honest opinions. This is about fact. Is there, is there evolution, or is it all made? Did somebody make those dinosaur bones and make them up and bury them in the ground and fake it for somebody? Is there no climate change despite, Kilimanjaro is melting and the seas around Florida are rising all the time? The polar bears are looking for new places to live. I mean, now this. It's not a question of the president. It's not a question of having an opinion. It's a question of him denying fact. Of every one of our 17 intelligence agencies, why does he deny? What's the politics of denial about here? Because I haven't quite figured it, except I have one theory: deny everything, and maybe your people back in the places that they love you will think you're strong.
Well, you've cited a bunch of examples there as comparisons where a lot of people have chosen to ignore evidence that points in one direction.
It's all him.
Kind of what the president is doing.
I don't know where he's in evolution, but go ahead.
Right. Well, okay. But in this situation, the thing
he hasn't evolved.
The thing that's really remarkable right now is that his surrogates are saying that they're not even discussing it with him. And there's reasons maybe the president.
Shane, by the way, Sean was supposed to check with the boss on that. How many days do we have to wait for that?
Well, I mean, we may be waiting a lot longer, because think about it. We're 5 months into his presidency right now, more than 6 months since we started talking about this. If the president hasn't said, yes, I believe the intelligence community's assessment to this point, what behooves him to say it now, especially because the idea of today was one of those unique days where we were really just talking about the Russian threat posed by hacking for future elections and what had been done in the past. Usually when we talk about that, we're also talking about these allegations of collusion between the Trump surrogates and Kremlin officials, which has been a reason for him to resist this. It is almost impossible these days to separate the two, except for on days like today where we're really focused on that future Russian threat. And so if the president hasn't gotten in lockstep with pretty much everybody else in Washington by this point, I'm not holding my breath.
Maybe because when you put Christmas presents under the tree, you expect the kids to come racing down in the morning to get the gifts. And if they don't, there's something strange. He ran downstairs to get the gifts. Go ahead.
Oh, it's phony, Chris. Like, anyone who spends any time around the president, the people we talk to on a daily basis as part of our reporting, will tell you privately that the president does not believe that Russia was behind this, that he thinks the whole thing is fake news, and he's always sounding off about this. So there's no good answer for Sean Spicer, because I'm sure if Sean Spicer is spending any time in the president's vicinity, he's hearing this. So, I mean, that's just the incontrovertible fact. And James Comey said himself that the only time Trump spoke to him about Russia was when he asked him to lay off Flynn.
Okay, Ken, I want you to handle this. Earlier this month, James Comey did testify the president showed little interest in the cyber attack. Here we go.
Did the president, in any of those interactions that you've shared with us today, ask you what you should be doing, or what our government should be doing, or the intelligence community, to protect America against Russian interference in our election system?
I don't recall a conversation like that.
Never?
No.
Do you find it odd?
Not with President Trump.
Right.
I attended a fair number of meetings on that with President Obama.
Well, meanwhile, the Attorney General testified he never received a briefing on Russia's activities. Let's watch him. This is Sessions.
Do you believe the Russians interfered with the 2016 elections?
It appears so. The intelligence community seems to be united in that. But I have to tell you, Senator King, I know nothing but what I've read in the paper. I've never received any detailed briefing on how hacking occurred or how information was alleged to have influenced the campaign.
You received no briefing on the Russian active measures in connection with the 2016 election?
No, I don't believe I ever did.
Ken, a speculation from you, sir. Why would the president refuse to even learn what's available to him? He can bring anyone in this country and the world really into the Oval Office for information if he wants it. The world's ready to brief him. He doesn't want to know. His attorney general doesn't want to know. What's the reasonable speculation about why they don't want to know the Russians did what they did?
Well, look, it's clear that Donald Trump sees this as impugning his election victory. But I want to talk to you, Chris, about the real-world implications of his refusal to come to grips with it. And the fact is there is no political leadership from the White House on this issue, and therefore there has been no response. And we learned today that we are still undefended and unprepared for the next wave of Russian attacks that intelligence officials tell us is coming in 2018.
Well, that's a great question, Congressman. What does the legislative body do if the executive body doesn't want to do anything? What can you do to protect us against? Well, we got these special elections. Probably that was small potatoes for the what we used to call the Reds. I don't think they're involved in Georgia 6th or whatever it was. But I do think they have an interest in screwing it up again next time, next fall.
Yeah, no. And the frustrating thing here is that a good response would start with the commander-in-chief saying this happened. This was a serious attack on our democracy. And by the way, that would help the hearing. You know, that nobody wants this hearing to be dragged out. I'd much rather be focusing on things that are of much more immediate concern to my constituents. I know the White House would like to not be talking about this investigation. Sadly, the White House's approach has been exactly the opposite that you would expect it to be if there was nothing to hide.
So what is he hiding?
Well, I don't know what he's hiding.
You really don't know. You've got staff. What do you think it is? Is it something that his son-in-law said to the Russians about sanctions? Was it some mixing of economic motive, personal economic motive from the Trump land with his government responsibilities during the transition? Was it something Flynn said to Kislyak? Was it something said over a period of time by all of them? Carter, Page, the whole rest of Manafort? Was it his shenanigans?
Yeah,
don't you have a suspicion as to where this problem is? The president has one.
I have my suspicions. But look, it's really important. The president's not taking this seriously. It's pretty important that everybody else, including the investigators, take this seriously and therefore not start speculating about where this may end up. You and I both know that there are all kinds of questions. There were tons of meetings that weren't reported by pretty much everybody, Flynn, Sessions, the Attorney General, others. We have a long way to go on this, and it would be assisted and helped, and it would move much more rapidly if the president would get on board, acknowledge that it happened, and then just say, hey, nothing to hide here. We will help in any way we can.
If you had Flynn ready to spill the beans tomorrow morning in testimony, would you give him immunity?
Well,
no, tomorrow morning end this. You said you want this over with. You get Flynn. You put the hot seat on. Put him in the hot seat and say you go into jail for 20 years, or you tell the truth right now about President Trump. Would you do that as a deal?
Only if
now.
Only if he's got something to offer. Remember, if he did,
you don't think he's got anything to offer?
Well, you know,
if he doesn't, a lot of them are clean. If he's clean, you think he might be clean?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying you wouldn't give him immunity unless you knew what he had to offer. So you don't get to come and say, "Oh, I'll testify."
If you knew he was ready to spill the beans on Trump, would you?
Well, he offered that. He offered to testify in exchange for immunity.
Would you give it to him?
I haven't heard what he has to offer, so I can't make a judgment there.
But you won't speculate if he's. So I just want to move this forward too. And if some people are ready to spin people are ready to sing, I'd like to hear them sing.
Yeah.
I don't care if a guy goes to jail for 5 years. I want to know what the president did.
Well, that's an option, but you do have to weigh what each person might have to offer with what the next person up the pecking order might have to offer and balance all those things. But to get back to your other question about...
careful.
Well,
the problem is, now
I'm
everybody's being so careful. You're being careful, Congressman. My question is, if you wanted to move faster, like you just said, let's move it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's why I'm getting a little tough here because I do worry that everybody's being so careful and special about this. What we're going to end up with is a lot of wasted time.
Chris, this is really important.
He offered to talk months ago.
We're talking about the core of our. We're talking about the core of our democracy.
Yet? Has he flipped?
You have got to be careful.
Okay, has Flynn flipped yet?
Of what we're talking about. My guess is, now remember, I don't have any particular insight into what's happening with the FBI, but my guess is that Michael Flynn has had a number of conversations with the Department of Justice investigators.
John, have you heard if he's flipped yet?
I have no idea.
Ken, has he flipped?
I don't have reporting on that, Chris, but I think Representative Himes makes sense there.
Which is, let me hear the sense again. I need
which is that he's had a number of conversations. I mean, when your lawyer issues a public statement saying my client has a story to tell.
I thought we're all being a little prissy around here.
No,
I'm just getting a little tired of it. Let's go. What?
No,
Okay,
I'm saying
I'm sorry.
when your lawyer issues a statement saying my client has a story to tell, you can assume he's negotiating
Yeah.
with the Department of Justice.
And he has so much. The reason I bring this up is this guy Flynn has so many charges coming, so much failure to report honestly in all the forms. Look, there's Saudi Arabia now, there's Turkey now, there's Russia now, and not one time in any incident has he been clear and honest in filling out the forms, which each case carries a felony charge of about 5 years against him. If I were him, I'd say it's time to sell what I got.
That's a point, but no offense to the congressman, it's not really the House's call. If you really want to see Flynn face any consequences, that's more Mueller's call at this point, which is why all these deconfliction talks are happening between each of the committee heads and the members. But just to address an old question that you asked.
You know, John Dean was a good rat. And if you get some rats, and this moved a lot faster. Before we even had the tapes, we had John Dean. Talk somebody, and somebody's got to give this guy some rat food so they'll start talking. Just a thought.
Yeah, but Chris, remember Oliver North.
Yeah.
Oliver North was given immunity by Congress, and it screwed up the prosecution, and his conviction was overturned. That's what they don't want to happen here.
Right. Right. And in the meantime, I just wanted to point out that there is something else that Congress is trying to do, which is that the Senate just passed a sanctions bill, which is hugely, hugely popular, that is kind of dying on the footsteps of the House right now because of technical problems. And so the question is, are there other things they can do to combat this, or to combat the threat going down the line while they're waiting for the investigation?
Whenever governments with governments with weaker constitutions have fallen by this inaction, the Greeks, the colonels just came in because the Greek democracy wasn't working. At some point, our government has to begin to perform. That is my major concern. It doesn't seem to perform. Anyway, thank you, Ken Delanian. You're such a grown-up, and I'm just ridiculously crazy here. Anyway, U.S. Congressman Jim Himes, I'm putting tough on